even though nitrogen is one of the most abundant gases in the atmosphere, to make it available for plants to grow or for humans to consume in terms of proteins, amino acids, it first needs to be fixed into stable nitrate. And soya is one of the few plants that can actually do that. So should we run out of fossil fuels, this planet will be in trouble. 2/3 of the population will be in trouble because we make nitrogen available in fertilizer to grow plants by means of burning of fossil fuel. We need high energy and we need high pressure in order to fix atmospheric nitrogen and make it available as fertilizer to grow plants. Soya fixes its own nitrogen, and you can see the nodules there in the roots. And good for environment, good for agriculture. It's also good for your health. It contains no cholesterol. It contains all the essential amino acids in the right ratio, and that is also very important, in the right ratio. It is low in certain amino acids, which is a precursor for homocysteine. And these days, everybody knows about homocysteine that visits a doctor. It is a pointer for heart disease in future if your homocysteine starts to climb. It contains no lactose. In a high population, even in South Africa, is lactose intolerant. In the Far East, most of those populations is also lactose intolerant. Soya contains no lactose. Soya contains numerous phytonutrients. It is not food, it's not like protein or carbohydrate or fats. It is factors that impacts on health, is health benefit. And it contains anti-carcinogenic properties. So soya is good for your health, and there's many other factors, many other reasons that I can list and talk about. Soya is one of the crops with the highest protein yield per unit area. It is the agricultural crop with the highest protein yield per unit area. So if we are protein starved, and Africa is protein starved, what should they look for in terms of producing protein? Most definitely soya. Here's a list of crops, and I start out with beef at the bottom because that also is about protein, and one of the reasons why beef is produced and considered. The yields are mentioned there, 22 kilograms per hectare, and then we go up to soya at the top, which yields much more than 700 kilograms per hectare. In my trials, I have yielded even up to 1,600 kilograms of protein. Not the yield. The yield can go up to 5 tons per hectare. So soya can help to feed the world. And a publication that I like to quote is by The Super Soya by Barbara Farr. And she expresses it, how much is required to feed one individual or keep one individual alive in terms of protein yield. She expresses it in acre of land, which is slightly less than half a hectare. And in terms of protein, if we graze on that half a hectare beef, we can supply one individual for 75 days in terms of meat protein. When we grow maize on that same plot, we can supply one individual for 350 days in terms of protein. Wheat, 875 days. Soya, 2,200 days. So if we run into food shortages, particularly protein, most definitely we should grow soybean. I like to show this slide when I do presentations. It's not coincidence that those countries with the highest intake of soya is also those countries with the highest IQ in the world. And one can explain it. If you have access to good quality protein from a very early age, you are going to grow brains. So, South Africa, we are 68th on this list of 81 countries that was measured, and the IQ that's given here is 72 average for South Africa. So if we want to up the IQ, average IQ in South Africa, we better start to eat more soya. T.C. Campbell started out his career by looking for a topic to do his degree on, and he got a bursary from the animal feeds industry in the US, and he was sent to the Philippines to go and show the Philippines how to eat better. They were malnourished, and particularly the children developed liver cancer. And when he started to study the reasons for that liver cancer, he came to a radical discovery which changed his life and eventually culminated into one of the biggest at that time medical studies that was ever undertaken. And he documented it in the book, The China Study. And that China study has some very radical statements and radical charts, and I'm going to show you some of them. But he summarized it, and I'm going to read it. Dietary protein proved to be so powerful in its effect that we could turn on, like a switch, turn it on or turn off cancer growth, simply by changing either the level consumed or the type of protein. If casein was used as the source of protein, 20% inclusion, it's promoted all stages of latent cancer in the rats that was used for this experiment. If soya was the source of protein, it inhibited the latent cancer that was already present in all the rats in the experiment. So, soya switched the cancer off and casein switched it on. That is a radical statement. So we give soya a plus point. I'm showing you some charts here, coming directly from the book, The China Study. This is about female colon cancer in relation to daily meat consumption. And I want you to look at the countries at the bottom of this chart, and you will notice that each time you will notice the soya consuming countries. In this case, Japan is mentioned there, and Japan is right at the bottom of the risk list. Whereas your meat consuming countries like New Zealand, USA is right at the top, highest risk incidence. In this map, you notice the association between animal versus plant protein intake and bone fracture. Those countries that are mainly plant-based diet, plant-based protein, they are right at the bottom of the risk for hip fracture incidents. If we move over to a one-on-one plant protein versus animal protein intake, you will notice that the risk increases dramatically. So the more animal protein based the diet, the higher the risk. Interesting that the countries in the Far East, they are mainly plant-based. They do not eat or they don't drink dairy. And dairy is assumed, even to this day, to build strong bones, hip fracture, drink more milk. They don't drink milk, they are lactose intolerant, and yet they have a very low risk of hip fracture incidents. Interesting. The association of rates of hip fracture with calcium intake. This is now countries like the USA where they realize that they need to do something about osteoporosis, so they go to the pharmacy and they increase their calcium intake. The countries with the highest calcium intake is also the countries with the highest hip fracture incidence. Amazing. Yeah. And the countries like Hong Kong, the bottom of the risk list, very little cow's milk intake, they are the countries with the least risk for hip fracture. Association of cow's milk consumption and incidence of type 1 diabetes. The same story. Japan, right at the bottom of the list. Finland, Sweden, Norway, much higher up. Higher risk. This is a very interesting chart, particularly in terms of what's going on in South Africa at the moment. Everybody is talking about the Banting diet. And is it good for you or is it not good for you? Take a look at Japan here. And notice the high carbohydrate intake in the Japanese population. Relatively low fat intake. Absolutely the opposite to the Banting diet. Look at the USA, lower carbohydrate intake, much higher fat intake. And look at their risk for diabetes in relation to that of Japan. Japan is lowest risk, USA highest risk, even though Japan has a high intake of unrefined carbohydrate. Interesting, isn't it? Association between cow's milk consumption and multiple sclerosis. Countries is not mentioned here, but you can see a direct relationship between intake of cow's milk. Countries is mentioned here again, and Thailand, Taiwan, Japan, Philippines, also a soya consuming country, right at the bottom. And the Netherlands, Denmark, New Zealand, right at the top of risk for breast cancer. We're going to talk about breast cancer some more. And here's another chart showing both prostate cancer and breast cancer risk in many countries. Again, Thailand right at the bottom, Korea right at the bottom, China right at the bottom, Japan right at the bottom, all those soya consuming countries. These two cancers are the most feared cancers on this planet. Even in South Africa, we are very concerned about breast cancer and prostate cancer. Now you know how to avoid it. Look, here's a prostate cancer, a map. China, South Korea, Japan, very, very low incidence. Australia, USA, very high incidence. The countries with the lowest intake of soya, very high incidence. Countries with a soya-rich diet, very low risk. Are you starting to get the message?
Yes,
Soya intake in children and teens decrease a lifetime cancer risk. A study involving 5,042 breast cancer patients, in other words, they already have cancer. A study was done in the US, and they were given a soy formula in their diet. So they had to take diet on a daily basis soya. Now the results. Soy food intake was inversely associated with mortality amongst those group of 5,000. And even the recurrence of breast cancer. Women in the highest soy food intake group had the lowest mortality and recurrence rate compared to women in the lowest soy food intake group. Women who had the highest level of soy food intake and who did not take a drug for breast cancer had a lower risk of mortality and a lower recurrence rate than women who had the lowest level of soy food intake and used the drug for breast cancer. Interesting, isn't it? The average isoflavin, and that is the factor, one of those phytonutrients in the soya that is associated with a lower risk. Isoflavin intake among the study group was 47 milligrams per day compared to only 1 or 6 milligrams for women in the USA on average. This was published in the journal, American Journal of Medical Association. One of Walter Veit's slides when he was here at University of Western Cape, he did studies on rabbits and fed them casein and soya as a source of protein. And casein, by the way, is the protein in milk. There's a significant difference between the soya group and the casein group in terms of calcium loss through the urine. And calcium loss, as you can guess, leads to osteoporosis in later life. So, animal protein versus soya protein and calcium loss. Animal protein is high and soya is low in sulfur-containing amino acids. It's both protein, but soya protein is low in sulfur-containing amino acids. that sulfur-containing amino acids, or specifically the sulfur in the amino acid, leads to acidity in the blood, and it needs to be neutralized. So what does the body do to try and neutralize that acidity? It withdraws calcium from the bones. And that leads to sulfur excretion also, and lowering of calcium in the bones, and to osteoporosis. Dietary protein, animal protein, increases the production of acid in the blood, which requires neutralization. It was published in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Consumption of dairy products, particularly at the age of 20 or earlier, were associated with an increased risk for hip fractures later on in life, and increased excretion of calcium in the urine. So, high intake of sulfur amino acids is not good for you. For another reason as well, not only for excretion or depletion of calcium in the bones, also there's another factor. Homocysteine these days is tested the same as testing for cholesterol. If you start to have problems, go to the doctor, he will check for cholesterol, and these days he will also check for homocysteine. Homocysteine has suggested that an elevated homocysteine level is a risk factor for heart disease. This evidence was first published in American Journal for Cardiology in 1995. So, soya is good for you because of lower sulfur-containing amino acids in the protein. Interesting. There was a notion that soya is not a complete protein, that the biological factor of soya is relatively low, and that we need to breed soya or select soya for higher sulfur-containing amino acids. Today, I know that that is not a good idea. And today we know that soya actually has a complete protein. All the essential amino acids and even non-essential amino acids in the right ratio. Very important. And I'm going to show you why. So in this map you can see different types of protein, and egg has got a complete protein, casein has got a complete protein, but you now know that casein is not good for you. And soya has got a complete protein, but it comes without cholesterol, it comes without the risk for homocysteine, and it is called meat without bones. I want to read you from the Harvard School of Public Health this news clip. Take away the water in the human body, and about 75% of your weight, your body mass, is protein. This chemical family is found throughout the body. It is in the muscle, in the bone, in the skin, in the hair, virtually every other body part or tissue. It makes up the enzymes that power many chemical reactions, and it's in the hemoglobin that carries oxygen in your blood. At least 10,000 different proteins make you what you are and keep you that way. 20 or so basic building blocks called amino acids provide the raw material for all proteins. Because the body doesn't store amino acids as it is done in terms of fats and carbohydrates, it needs a daily supply. Did you get that? Protein needs to be taken on a daily basis. You do not store it like fat or carbohydrates. The body needs a daily supply of amino acids to make all this protein that is required in the body. Very important. Here is a list of those amino acids, and I want to point out some of them. Look at the methionine and the cysteine and compare whole soya or soy milk with beef. You will notice that beef is much higher than in methionine and cysteine than soy milk or whole soya. Look at lysine, and I'm going to tell you about lysine a little later. Look at the relatively higher lysine in beef compared to soy milk or whole soya. And then look at tryptophan. Beef is lower in tryptophan compared to soya. Soya is higher. Another amino acid which is not an essential amino acid but plays a very important role is arginine. And another one is glutamic acid. Soya is very high in glutamic acid. And I couldn't understand why until I came across it in research. I'm going to tell you about it. In other words, all proteins are not the same. They are made up of amino acids in different ratios, and all proteins are not the same. So don't just look at protein content. You need to look at how that protein is made up in terms of amino acids. Look at this. The addition of a single amino acid, lysine, and I've pointed out lysine, to soy protein enhances cholesterolemia, in other words, the increase of cholesterol in the blood, by 53%. And arteriosclerosis, the buildup of plaque in the arteries, by 56%, respectively. Wow. Be careful what you mix and match. It is suggested that there is a balance between essential and non-essential acids, which participate in the regulation of lipoprotein, cholesterol, triglycerides by synthesis. I pointed out glutamic acid. It's got the ability to cross the membrane into the brain and remove excess ammonia produced by the brain during normal brain function. It also acts as a messenger and works to improve mental alertness and thought processes. Glutamic acid has been used to treat Parkinson's disease, mental retardation, and even schizophrenia. Now, just imagine bringing your kid up on a daily soya quota. In terms of what I've just read, over a lifelong period. You think soya is good for man? Soya is high in glutamic acid. Even though glutamic acid is a so-called non-essential amino acid. Why do we stress so much in South Africa? Why do we have such high incidences of mental diseases? Perhaps we should eat more soya. One of Neil Nedley's slides, Dr. Neil Nedley from the US, he showed the incidence of tryptophan in different sources, and you will see that tofu has the highest source of tryptophan. Now, what is the value of tryptophan for the individual? It is a precursor to serotonin. Serotonin is the happy hormone. Melatonin is the sleep hormone. If you can't sleep, take some more tofu or tryptophan. It is also one of the key brain chemicals involved in the regulation mood. Once again, mood swings, stability. Among other functions, serotonin promotes feeling for calm, relaxation, sleepiness. Lack of serotonin is associated with depression. Many of today's powerful antidepressant drugs work to increase the level of available serotonin in the brain. You can do without that if you have a daily intake of soya products. We give it another star. There's a saying in the world that the Japanese women don't grow old and they don't get fat. Very, very little obesity in Japan, less than 3% amongst the females. In contrast to the US, where more than 34% these days. Japanese women don't get old or fat. There's a book, you can read it. And what does the Japanese diet consist of? The rural, average Japanese diet: fish, sea and land vegetables, soya, rice. Soya is their source of protein. Rice is their source of carbohydrate. Fruit and green tea. And as you know, the Japanese holds the record for longevity. The woman has got the longest life expectancy on this planet. The men also has the longest life expectancy for men on this planet. Not a coincidence that they eat soya and have the longest life expectancy. I quickly want to talk about estrogen. Now, they say that soya contains phytoestrogens, and that's one of the main criticisms against soya. Now, let me tell you, it is not estrogen. It is not a hormone. It is a flavonoid, isoflavone. So it's not a hormone, but it's called a hormone, phytoestrogen, because it behaves like estrogen, and it can actually protect the body against the hormone, the body hormone. I want to read from Cornell University fact sheet the following. Estrogen is a hormone that is necessary for the normal development and growth of breasts and organs important for childbearing. It helps control a woman's menstrual cycle and is essential for reproduction. Estrogen also helps maintain the heart and healthy bones. Both men and women require estrogen. However, a woman's risk for breast cancer is associated with lifelong exposure to estrogen. A diet rich in phytoestrogens, like soya, has been proposed as a way to decrease breast cancer risk. Why is this so? Most phytoestrogens are not stored in the body. So the soya phytoestrogen is not stored in the body. It needs to be consumed on a daily basis. And it's 100,000 times weaker. But phytoestrogen acts as a weak estrogen and may prevent the stronger human estrogen from binding to the estrogen receptors. If the weaker estrogen, phytoestrogen, binds to the receptor instead of the stronger one, there may be less breast cell division. Women that have diets rich in phytoestrogen also excretes more estrogen in their urine and have lower blood estrogen levels. Some studies have shown that women with a diet rich in soya or phytoestrogen have longer, hence fewer menstrual cycles, and all these factors contribute to reduced breast cancer risk. Another star. Also, menopause problems is not experienced in those soya consuming countries. Phytoestrogen are the most widely studied, which can help in reduce hot flushes, maintain healthy cholesterol levels, protect bones from osteoporosis, help good skin condition, and help brain function. Let me talk about the menopause a little more. Estrogen is a powerful regulator of body temperature. So those temperature fluctuations in the menopause period, while 85% of North American women will experience hot flushes, only 14% of Singapore women, less than 5% of Japanese women. Why? They have a high intake of soya products and isoflavones, or the phytoestrogen, which results in low occurrence of hot flushes. Wow. Another radical statement is that cow's milk is not good for you. Now, I must immediately say that I grew up on cows. I grew up on a farm where we had cows, and I grew up on cow's milk. Today, I know better, and I will definitely advise my children not to give my grandchildren cow's milk. Why? Let me explain that in the following 2 or 3 slides, including this one. Luckily, we don't milk rats. So we don't drink rat's milk. Look at this chart, which shows the protein content of the milk and the time to doubling the body mass. In the rat's case, it's got almost 12% protein, and drinking rat's milk will double the body mass in 4 days. In terms of goats, in 19 days. In terms of cattle, cow's milk, a calf will double its body mass in 47 days. Human babies is only supposed to double their body mass in 120 days. Now the question is, why do we have so much overweight babies in the world these days? Because cow's milk is so much more accessible and advertised for calcium, for strong bones. Now you know better. Not only the calcium or the protein, the casein protein, but also the hormones. Look at this. Here is soy milk compared to cow's milk. Now you can look at the protein, you can look at the fat and the carbohydrate. Look at the saturated and the unsaturated fatty acids. Look at the casein, but also keep in mind the hormones. Now, what hormone would you expect in cow's milk? The growth hormone, the estrogen, which is 100,000 times more powerful than the phytohormone in soy milk. Let's talk about the fatty acids, the unsaturated and the saturated fatty acid. There's two essential fatty acids that you require for healthy lifestyle. It's the omega-6 and the omega-3. Now, omega-3 is very, very unstable. It doesn't have a shelf life. In other words, you will not find it in the supermarket. It doesn't have a good shelf life, and it's better to get omega-3 straight from the seed before it is milled, before the oil is extracted. The disproportionate intake of omega-6 to omega-3 happened when vegetable oil became accessible in the previous century and went to the shelf life. And because omega-6 has a longer shelf life, your lifestyle these days is much more focused on omega-6 than it is on omega-3. Look at the trend over the past 50 to 100 years. In 1935 to 1939, the ratio was about 8 to 1 between omega-6 and omega-3. From 1935 to 1985, that ratio increased to 10, slightly more than 10 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. Today, the ratio is more like 10 to 1, even 20 to 1, for some individuals, even up to 25 to 1. You can see the problem rising. And the recommended ratio, we're not sure, but it's between 1 to 4 or 1 to 2. There's high risk for low omega-3 consumption. Most of us are already aware of that, and we try our best to increase our omega-3 consumption. And fish is a good source. Now, look at the different oils here. And we are comparing omega-6 to omega-3. You will notice that sunflower oil, which is the popular oil in South Africa, and you can buy it in the chain stores. 0 omega-3, and it's high in omega-6. So up goes your omega-6 on a daily basis. Now let's start to look for omega-3. Canola, a good ratio, almost 1 to 2. Walnut, flaxseed is an excellent source of omega-3, but don't crush it until you eat it. Keep it whole. That seed coat keeps the oil in unoxidized form, so you crush it before you throw it on your porridge in the morning. Flaxseed is a good source. Fish, obviously, is a good source. And also soya. Soya is about 5 to 1. Not ideal according to current wisdom, but maybe in future we will discover that maybe 5 to 1, or slightly more than 5 to 1, is the best. Who knows? Science corrects itself as time goes on. And a scientist is always very careful when he makes a statement, because tomorrow it may alter by some new wise guys on the block. I quickly want to introduce you to the difference between soya that's generally grown in South Africa now and the soya that's been grown in the Far East and consumed in the Far East for thousands of years. The so-called large-seeded vegetable soya. That soya is the same as the soya, same botanical name, Glycine max. But the soya in the Far East have been selected and bred for human taste, for human consumption, over thousands of years. So it's got a pleasing aroma, it's got a better taste than the soya that we have in South Africa. It's non-GM, and I'll talk a little about GM. And it's got a large seed and different colors, whereas the soya that you buy in South Africa is just the golden color. They have soya in different colors, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. What I want to state is that the soya that's grown in South Africa and in the West in general goes for the animals. Good protein goes for the animals, very little for human consumption. Less than 7% in South Africa goes for human consumption. And then I want to encourage you to look at the large-seeded vegetable soya grown in the Far East. In this slide, see all the colors? Flavonoids, and flavonoids today we know is a health factor. It benefits the human health. And here's a black one. That brown one has got a basmati flavor. And the small soya seed on the left is these days genetically modified, and it is the one that's grown in South Africa. Now, I'm partly to blame for bringing the small seeded soya to South Africa. I was the first appointed soya researcher in South Africa, and my mandate was to bring soya from all over the world to South Africa, germplasm, and to quickly find the best adapted ones with the highest yield so that we can start soya production in South Africa for animal feed. Soya that was introduced from the US was best adapted, and we started to grow it, and today we produce more than 1 million tons. In the meantime, genetically modified lines came on the scene and was also introduced to South Africa since the year 2000, 2001. And from that time on, there's no there's no identity preservation, so it's very, very difficult to find non-GM soya in South Africa commercially grown. We are starting up a new industry for the second time, a soya industry, and this time it is the large-seeded non-GM soya. And at this stage we grow it in KZN, where it's better adapted. We are still working towards best adaptation, but we are managing to grow it and to produce some which is available in the supermarkets. GM, why the talk about genetically modification? In the first place, it is introducing a gene from a species that was never part of the human diet, bring that species into the human food source, which was never before part of the human food source. GMO is actually a misnomer. Genetically modified organism, all of us, including myself, is genetically modified. But it's not transgene. My father and my mother married, and I am sexually produced, but it is genes that was brought into and mixed from the same species. When we talk about GMO, we are actually talking about taking genes from a different species, from a spider, and introducing it into a goat. They cannot sexually reproduce. But by biotechnology, we can introduce a gene from a spider into goat's milk. It has happened, and now we can produce a protein in the goat's milk which is stronger than steel. Let me take from the publications, and there are publications appearing. There is strong resistance against this because you can understand that there is lobby groups, or there's people with the interest, or groups with the interest in keeping this under wraps. Why? Because they have invested millions of dollars to develop a patented product in order to make money. From this publication, which is available on the internet, we conclude that these data from the research highlight signs of toxicity, possibly due to the pesticides that's used in the GM corn. In addition, unintended direct or indirect metabolic consequences of the genetically modification cannot be excluded. Now, I've already showed you when you mix genes and come up with different proteins, what the consequences can be. If you get to a protein with higher lysine content, did you notice what the consequences is? Here we are introducing a gene into the food source, which will change the protein, and who knows what the consequences of that may be. From another study, this is the first study to reveal the presence of circulating pesticides associated with genetically modified foods in women with and without pregnancy, paving the way for a new field in reproductive toxicology, including nutrition and uteroplacental toxicities. Here's a whole new study field opening up because of GMO. Who knows where this is going in future? I want to summarize the different factors in soya that contributes to your health. When I started out as a young enthusiastic scientist, aspirant scientist I should say, at Potchefstroom, the adults, the senior people that wears the glasses, came to Potchefstroom and told me, young man, you need to select, you are now starting a new field of study in South Africa, you need to select soya with higher sulfur-containing amino acids. And they told me there's many factors in soya which makes it unfit for human consumption. And they listed some of those factors. And I've got those very factors here on the screen this evening. And I'm telling you that those factors are actually good for you. Times have changed. Alpha-linolenic acid, the one that goes rancid very quickly, you already know it's good for your health, good for the heart. The isoflavones, which is also in that acid, it lowers cholesterol. It improves the digestive tract function. It prevents breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer. It's good for bone health, improves lipid metabolism. Lecithins improve lipid metabolism, improve memory and learning abilities. Lectins, and there's much talk about lectins and the risk of lectins. It's anti-carcinogenic. It's an immunostimulator. Linoleic acid, essential fatty acid. That's the omega-6. It also lowers cholesterol. Peptides, readily absorbed, reduce bodily fat, anti-carcinogenic. Phytosterols, it also lowers cholesterol, lower prostate cancer risk. And then the soya protein, specific soya protein, reduces body fat, reduces cholesterol. Saponin regulates lipid metabolism. It's a powerful antioxidant. Should you eat soya? I think by this time you already can answer for yourself. Here's a lady, octogenarian, more than 100 years old, from Okinawa. You will remember the publication National Geography identified 3 populations with highest life expectancy associated with their lifestyle. The Okinawan's was one. They're also from the Far East. And Seventh-day Adventist was another group which was not regionally associated. And they tried to come up with the reasons for that. I want to end off again with a statement from Professor T.C. Campbell. He went further and he investigated soya. Tried to understand why is it that in the West soya does not give the same response as in the Far East. And he came up with the whole food idea. In the Far East they eat soya whole. They don't extract components from it and take it to the pharmacy and sell it at the pharmacy. They eat whole soya. And he has an example here. Now the same applies for soya, but the example that he uses here is apple. Now 100 grams of apple contains 5.7 milligrams of vitamin C, which is very little. But 100 grams of apple has the antioxidant activity equivalent to 1,500 units of vitamin C. Wow. And 1,000 units is already quite a powerful pill, should you buy it from the pharmacy. So it's not the vitamin C per se, it is that synergistic effect of many, many factors. Now let me read further. Every apple contains thousands of antioxidants whose name, beyond a few like vitamin C, are still unfamiliar to us. There's so much that we still do not know. And each of these powerful chemicals has the potential to play an important role in supporting our health. They impact thousands upon thousands of metabolic reactions inside the human body. But calculating the specific influence of each of these chemicals isn't nearly sufficient to explain the effect of the apple as a whole. Because almost every chemical can affect every other chemical, have synergistic effects, the combined effect is much, much more powerful. There is an infinite number of possible biological consequences. We will carry on for millennia to study just the apple, just the simple soya. Another book that you can look up is The Simple Soya and Your Health by Mark Messina from Loma Linda University. Any questions? If you buy soya produced in South Africa and compare that, if it's the same variety or the same large-seeded vegetable soya, for instance, compare that to the soya that was produced in Japan, which one should you choose? Which one is the better one for you? Well, both of them are glycine max. And if a variety that happens to be well adapted to the climate in Japan is also well adapted to the climate in South Africa, there should be very little difference, because they are getting the same heat units, or they are supposedly getting the same heat units, the same love and care, then the quality should be the same. There shouldn't be much difference. The problem that we have with soya is to adapt it, and that is a genetic, it won't make any difference to the quality of the soya. It is just trying to adapt it to latitude. So the genes that code for triggering flowering, and I'm not sure if I showed that slide. Yes, I did. The two plants, the one plant very short and the other one very big. It's seed from the same bag. The short plant was planted in a climate cabinet, a growth chamber, at short day lengths, and the other one at 16-hour day lengths, long day lengths. The one never got the message that winter is coming, whereas the one in the short day length chamber at 10 hours day length got the message, oh my, winter is coming, I better do my thing and reproduce. If you take a soya variety that's well adapted to Natal and you grow it here in Western Cape, your days is much longer than our days up there. The sun goes down over Clifton Beach much, much later than in Durban. So it means that that soya will wait longer before flowering. And it may be that that soya will not be able to grow mature seeds before ripe. I don't know if you get ripe down here. Frost.
Yeah, not really frost.
Frost.
Maybe further,
Okay. Frost will kill the plant if it doesn't mature the seeds in time. So we can cross-pollinate and we can breed for adaptation to different climates or different day lengths, and in that way we can come up with the same chemical quality than what you buy from the Far East. And we are trying our best to adapt those lines from the Far East to South Africa, and eventually we will have lines that will be adapted to the Cape or to the Transvaal or wherever in South Africa. We are slowly expanding, and eventually we hope to establish a new industry in South Africa. Well, we are becoming, what disease is in Japan that's not in South Africa? That's the question. Should we rather import because they don't have diseases that we have? Well, the answer is we've become a global village. Up to fairly recently, in fact, up to about 2001, we did not have the rust that they had in the Far East on the soya. Unfortunately, that rust came across in somebody's pocket or by some way, and it gradually came down from Uganda, and we actually tracked it as it came from country to country. Eventually in 2001 it reached South Africa, and now it's a major problem in South Africa as well. There's very, very few diseases which is not all over the world already. But it is so that diseases, sometimes we are lucky to have less disease in certain areas in the country than in other areas. High humidity or low humidity can stimulate certain diseases. And it means you need less chemicals or methodology to combat the disease. I want to point something out to you. Plant disease do not carry over to humans. So if you find a disease like purple seed stain, you get a purple stain on that seed, it's got purple seed stain disease, Cercospora, on the plant, carried over by the seed. That will not affect you, whereas that's not the case with animal protein. The consumption of animal protein, the disease in that animal protein will carry over to humans. Not genetically modified? Well, at this stage we have the only registered non-GM large-seeded vegetable soya in South Africa, the program that we are running in the Durban area, and we are trying our best to grow more and more seed every year, And I did bring some, about 30 kilograms down with me, and we actually brought some with us this evening. So you can get some from us in future. We are trying to distribute already through Woolworths supermarket. You can find the green. You can also go to the waterfront, one of the restaurants at the waterfront, Willoughby's. They sell the frozen one that's imported. You can go and try it out there, or Woolworths also, we are marketing through Woolworths at the moment, frozen, and in season, fresh as well. Fresh green, then fresh frozen. Soon we will also have roasted soya, and then of course the mature dried, which we brought some. Yes, which soy milk is the best to use? Fortunately, we now have several brand names in South Africa, and it's difficult to say which. I haven't studied the different processes that's used. If it says non-GM on the label, then you are assured that there is no GM in that soya that's used. If it says casein free, then you know there's no casein in it. Some brands market it with casein. The taste is the reason that they give why they add casein back to soy milk. I do not understand that, because that is one of the reasons why you want to select non-dairy milk, is to get away from the casein. Well, so read the label. Legislation is fairly strict these days. Everything needs to be on the label. So check the label and find the brand that suits your needs. Why are so many people against soya, and why is there so much published on the internet against the use of soya? Well, an easy answer is, tell me which countries use soya for thousands of years already, and tell me, do they grow breasts, the young boys? The Chinese, the Japanese, the Orientals grow and consume soya for thousands of years, and they do not have a population increase problem, so it doesn't affect their sexuality, it does not affect their femininity. They are the countries with the highest life expectancy. They are the countries with the highest IQ. They are the countries with the lowest risk for diseases which are reaching epidemic proportions in the West. So that's one easy answer. Another answer may be that there is large companies with vested interest in products which compete directly with this new kid on the block, soya protein or soya milk. Again, let's ask ourselves the question, should we still smoke while we know that nicotine is bad for us? The same question, should we use cow's milk if we know that casein is a most powerful cancer stimulant? Same question. Should we use a product which is high in hormones, growth hormones, which is going to stimulate your child to double its mass and grow much taller than what you grow. He's not going back to the stature of Adam. He's doubling his weight because he's drinking cow's milk instead of breast milk. And so I can carry on and on. The question is easy to answer. I'm not scared of that one. It is for you to decide. Go on the internet and find those articles and see who is behind those articles that is attacking soya. And you will find, even research articles, research publications, who financed that research and how was that research proposed in order to come up with a specific answer. Any other questions? Thank you for listening. Thank you for paying attention. And I trust that you will be ambassadors from now on. It's for you to make the decision. And like many out there, they decide to smoke in the face of all the risks. It's for you to decide. Let us close with prayer. Let's stand. Father, this evening we discussed a master-minded plant, part of divinely designed nature. We have noticed that that plant was not only master designed to be a pretty plant or a plant for the use by animals, but that it was specifically designed and formulated with man in mind. We thank you, Father, for your almighty wisdom. Thank you for restricting man, for tampering with your creation. Father, help us to see, help us to understand, help us to do our best to make sure that our children are brought up healthy and with an alert mind to appreciate your nature, appreciate your master design for us here on this planet. Father, we want to be ready one day when your plan culminates into eternity. Help us to spread the message. There is so many ignorant out there. There's so many that do not know. Help us to spread the word. We ask it in your name. Amen.